This poem is called Spoken Word. We have been taught to use our inside voice, shrink ourselves to fit in their neat little boxes, speaking that word, speaking our truth, project so they can hear us in the back. More power, more power. The stage is where we wield that power, channeling our pain through this pen and mic. I just want to be heard.
Welcome back to another episode of the Brown Sugar Cafe podcast, the place where poetry meets conversation. I'm your host, Terrence P. Elmore, and before we get into today's topic, make sure you hit that plus sign so you don't miss an episode. Also, please subscribe to my blog, thebrownssugarcafe.blog, and if you find any value in this episode or any other episodes, make sure you leave a heartfelt review. So with that being said, let's get to it.
Yes. Hey, y'all. I'm Tayler Simon. I am a poet, a writer, a bookstore owner, social worker by education, daughter, sister. Um, I just love everything at the intersection of liberation of all people and books. So that's me.
Well, thank you for taking the time to join the podcast and spend a little time with us and tell us your story. That opening poem, wow. What was the inspiration behind that?
Yeah, so I was kind of deepening my writer journey, and I went to this writing group called the Treehouse. And it's a group of Black writers that meet at the House of Hathor here in Columbia. And it's a 2 hour workshop where they meet. I think they still meet weekly, but at the time they were meeting weekly. We did writing for the first hour and then spoken word practice the second. And that was a learning curve for me and really got me out of my comfort zone. And a lot of that poem was inspired by seeing other spoken word artists, slam poets getting feedback. And I just started thinking about how slam poetry, kind of like a cousin of rap, was very important to Black people expression, and how in our everyday lives we're told to shrink ourselves and code switch for other people to be more professional because being ourselves isn't seen as professional, and how we really use slam poetry as a way to alchemize our pain into art. And um, the more power part of the poem was from the specific feedback of the instructor, Moses Freeman. And he would all like his most common critique is more power, let us hear you in the back. And I just thought that was such an important way to really think about just our voices in general. Like, have more power, don't make ourselves small, make sure they can hear us in the back instead of playing small. And so that was kind of the inspiration through that poem. A lot of my poetry, I joke with a lot of people, instead of doing doodles during like lectures and workshops and stuff, I'm kind of scribbling down parts and
Oh,
pieces of
wow.
poems.
Yeah.
So I wrote that during one of those sessions.
Wow. Yeah, I've wanted to make it to a treehouse event, but I have another podcast that I'm on and we record on Wednesdays. So that's always been a scheduling conflict, but I always look at what, people share from there and I'm like, man, this is pretty cool, especially like for me, like I don't know, like I'm just now getting okay with, sharing like reading my poems. It's weird. Like, I don't know. Like I can
It's
read
fun.
anything else. I can read somebody else's poems, but when it comes to mine, and it's not like they're that personal, but I've just like over the last couple of years became comfortable with doing it.
It is a vulnerable experience when you're reading your own poetry. It's like, Oh, I it's one thing of like publishing a book because you don't have to be around the people when they're
Uh,
reading it. But it's another thing when you're actually reading the poems or performing the poems and seeing people's reactions. And I know I get a little intimidated from that as well.
yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those things because like I had to present papers and stuff when I was in college, like in front of big audiences and stuff. It was nothing. It was a breeze. I was just like, okay. But for whatever reason, it was just this thing like, I don't know. And I think it might have to, now that we're having this conversation, it might have to do with like a power thing. Like back
Mm,
then, maybe I was shrinking myself because, like I said, I could read somebody else poetry with no problem. But so now, yeah, that's probably what it was. I was shrinking myself. So more power is definitely needed, especially when it comes to poetry.
right. And poetry, I just finished reading the book Tony at Random a couple weeks ago, and it's about Toni Morrison's editing career at Penguin Random House. And one of the thing, well, she edited everything, like everything under the sun. So one of the things that Toni Morrison really focused on editing in the 70s and 80s were poetry collections. And that was like the height of like the Black Power movement and how poetry was so popular. Like it talked about how poetry was like one of the best selling genres back in the 60s and 70s among Black people. And now people are like, poetry, I don't get it, or it's only poetry. Like if you are doing slam, it's only poetry if like you're turning it into rap, and how it's evolved since then. But going back to the roots of like just bare bones poetry anthologies by Black people were so much made up so much of the Black Power movement.
Yes, it was the Harlem Renaissance. When I learned about that in school, was how I fell in love with poetry. I learned about Langston Hughes, and I was like, man, this is pretty cool.
Because we didn't get a lot of, besides like Langston Hughes, and I don't think Zora Neale Hurston wrote too much poetry, but those are the only poets that we, or writers that we really learned about. And it made a disconnect between like classic literature and us
Yeah.
because we didn't see our contributions to the literary canon because they were intentionally left out of the literary canon. And so a lot of us were like I don't like reading, I don't like poetry, I don't get it. What is Whitman trying to say?
Yeah.
But when we hear it through like our experiences and our perspectives, it connects differently. And I quote this librarian, Rudine Sims Bishop, all the time. She says books should be like mirrors where we can see ourselves, but also windows to see into the lives of people who are different than us.
Man, that is so true. I always try to encourage people to read something that they may not be interested in just so they can get a different perspective. Like, I can't remember where I got that from, but somebody said something like, even with magazines, they said, when magazines used to be a big thing and they were all over in the stores and stuff, it was like pick up a magazine that you wouldn't normally pick up. Start there. And then you'll find some information that you normally wouldn't know. And so that translates over to books. Like maybe pick up a book that you normally wouldn't pick up, or at least have a conversation with someone that's read a book and find out about it. Like you may not have to pick up a book and try to read the whole thing or buy it, but maybe, hey, somebody's talking about a book and you're like, that offhand doesn't sound interesting to me, but tell me more. You might be
Hmm.
interested.
Yes, definitely. And speaking of magazines, one of the things that they talked about in Tony at Random too, that I was just like, whoa, it was a coveted position for writers to get their short stories in Playboy magazine.
Wow.
Like, and it didn't have to be any like just chapters from their novels
Yeah.
or like essays about current events. Like it was a big deal to be published in Playboy. And like you don't think about that as being like this great literary work, but
Yeah.
That's how it used to be
Yeah,
because they were like, we got to meet the readers where they are.
that is so true. Wow. Wow. Man. See, now I'm interested in that book for myself because
Yes.
just for the little bit you told me, it's just like, wow, okay.
I
Go
definitely
ahead.
recommend it to anybody who wants to do publishing because I it really got me into reading more books by editors and about the publishing process just to strengthen my craft as a writer.
How did you get started with writing and when did poetry come into play?
So I always joke that I wrote my first book in second grade. It was about the tooth fairy. And like I wrote it, illustrated it. It was part of like this program where second graders were paired with fifth graders to write a book. And so I've been writing ever since then, silly little stories. And as I became a teenager, that's when I really started getting into poetry. I would write all these angsty poetries like, I'm so alone and nobody understands my feelings and things like that. So I've always been writing. And then I started a secret blog in college. I didn't want anybody to know it was me. And then I only wrote two blog posts on it. And one of the posts was about how I felt bad that my best friend was still hanging out with my ex boyfriend. And then I saw a comment that seemed oddly specific. And I was
Mm.
just like, she read the blog post. Now I got to delete the whole thing. So I was very like afraid of connecting myself to my writing and being vulnerable in that way. But after I got my master's degree, I got my first job. I wanted to start taking writing seriously again, and so I started another blog called Liberation is Lit and started talking about books and how they made me learn more about different social justice issues. And then at the same time, I was writing with other online publications around feminist issues, social justice issues. And I ended up publishing my first book of poetry, which was kind of a collection of poetry I had written since the pandemic in 2020, and how it kind of outlined my journey of feeling like my feelings were too much for the world and
Mm,
hiding
yeah.
behind perfection, and then leaning into vulnerability as my superpower. And even publishing that was a very vulnerable experience because it's one thing to write blog posts about books and like just intellectual things, but it's another to really write vulnerably like my personal poetry. And so I was like, should I publish under my real name? Should I publish under a pseudonym? So I decided no. The whole point was to stop hiding behind perfection. So I published under my real name, and I was just so amazed with the reception of the book. It changed my life in different ways. Mostly, or the biggest reason I can think of is my dad read the book, and um he it opened up conversations about like my childhood and things that we had never talked about before, and that definitely made us come closer together. So just after that experience, being vulnerable through my writing just became so empowering. So I just kept with it. Now I'm on my third poetry collection, Black Madonna. I've written a guide to self publishing. I've co edited an anthology of other Black women's work. So I am living my writer dreams right now.
Yeah, you and congratulations. One of the things that I've noticed that amongst the many of things is that you're a strong advocate for literacy and
Mhm,
books. And you've gone to the state house
mhm.
to fight for banned books. So let people know who are maybe not aware what's going on with banned books and why that's a major issue and something we shouldn't keep quiet about.
Yes. So I am such a nerd when it comes to book censorship. It is a really dire situation that is quietly happening. there were over 10,000 books banned or challenged in 2024 alone. And that is exponentially more than books that were censored during the Red Scare in the 50s. So this movement came about with this parents' rights group, Moms for Liberty, after they were mad about their children having to wear masks in schools. After the COVID restrictions lifted, they turned their attention to books about sensitive topics. And in those challenging of books, they've targeted books around LGBTQ content, Black history, any history around people of color, because they felt that their white children would feel guilty for things like slavery and racism. And so they sought to eliminate those types of materials from school curriculum, libraries, things like that. And right now in South Carolina, we are number one in the country for banning books statewide. So typically, book bans happen on individual county or district levels. And South Carolina is one of 3 states that bans books statewide. And we have 22 books banned out of all school libraries, classrooms, and curricula. And that's all due to Regulation 43170 that says any book with sexual materials automatically aged and developmentally inappropriate. Doesn't designate between kindergartners or 18-year-olds. And a lot of the books, I would probably say around half of the books that are banned right now for that regulation, have to do with people telling their stories about abuse. And it's so important to hear, for young people especially, to hear that they're not alone when they experience it. They need to know the signs of when they are being abused. They need that empowerment of like navigating those feelings, finding community, finding support. And then kids who haven't gone through that need to build that empathy about how to support someone they know when they are being abused. We don't have a lot of issues around book banning for Black history, although there's currently a lawsuit between the NAACP and our state superintendent after she got rid of AP African American history. They said they were going to do a pilot, students enrolled to classes, and then all of a sudden, oh, African American history is too controversial, so we're going to pull the program. So even though the books aren't being banned yet, we still have issues around just Black history being deemed controversial, and these topics are too difficult for kids to learn about. There's one teacher in Chapin who her job was threatened because she was teaching the book Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates that talks a lot about his experience as a Black man in America. And she wasn't teaching the book to talk about racism. She was teaching the book to talk about how to shape an argument. But parents complained that their kids were feeling uncomfortable talking about racism, and her job was put in jeopardy. She and the librarian from Chapin High School are also a part of that lawsuit, represented by the NAACP. So there is this general attack on Black history, African American history, being seen as too hard for the white kids to learn. But what about the Black students? Where I remember not too long ago, my cousin went to Lower Richland High School, and her white history teacher made her class write papers on defending why slavery was a good thing. And thinking
Wow.
about the psychological impacts of Black people having to justify their brutalization and murder,
Yeah.
and the trauma we still experience to this day from the trauma that was passed down in our genetics, and that being seen as too uncomfortable for white kids to learn about, but not too uncomfortable for Black kids to experience every single day.
The thing about history and people getting so upset about Black History Month, and it's a part of American history. Like, you
Hmm.
can't act like these things didn't happen. And kids are uncomfortable. You don't want your kids to be uncomfortable with that. But sometimes it takes people being uncomfortable to get an understanding. you know, people's feelings matter. I'm a believer that people's feelings matter. They don't always line up with facts. And that's part of the hard conversation. So, sometimes you have to have these hard conversations, and you have to let people know how things were and what happened. Because if you just ignore it and try to act like it didn't happen, when certain things happen currently in the future, now they're looking like, well, where did this come from? Because they weren't taught these things in school. Just like growing up, let's say, even far as like genetically, like something with our parents, things they used to do when they were younger that we didn't know about. And then we're having these same things or issues as adults. And then talking to them, it's like, oh, yeah, I used to do that, when I was your age or whatever. And it's like, you didn't tell me that, And if you had that conversation with that person, maybe they could have navigated it better. Maybe they could have understood. But just thinking that, like, back to what you said earlier, just feeling like you're alone, sometimes it's hard to navigate. But if you hear that, this is why this happened. This is why things are shaped this way in this country. This is why a certain group of people feel this way. It's not just because they want to or they're just complaining. It's things that were set in place that still exist, especially if you live in a Jim Crow era. Like some of these small towns here in South Carolina, they still feel like sundown towns.
Oh yeah, I was so I'm on the South Carolina Book Award committee, and they have their meetings at White Knoll Middle School. And I got confused and went to White Knoll High School. So I got lost in Lexington. And I'm from Columbia. Like, you don't get lost in Lexington. You don't get lost in West Columbia. And West Columbia is changing. I'm healing my relationship with West
Yeah,
Columbia. But Lexington, Red
yeah.
Bank area especially, like that is still like I just feel the energy of me not being welcome, me standing out as an outsider, and I was terrified. I'm like, what if a Lexington cop stops me? Like, I don't feel like they're going to help me in this situation. Feel like I'm going to get questioned. But just I read a lot of books where the land has memory, and
Mm,
just like driving through all of the like tiny little towns that are make up Lexington, I'm just like, I feel the memory of my ancestors being afraid of this. And it's not something that like my grandmother especially instilled in us. She would make comments like there it's still open to this day, but on I believe it's Knox Abbott. There's a cafe called Just Us Cafe. And she was like, you know
yeah.
why that restaurant's called Just Us, right? And just little
Wow.
stories like
Yeah.
that. It's just it you just feel that energy, and sometimes you can't explain it. It's like, why do I feel fear here in this? Why don't I feel welcome? Like, what is it about this place? And that's part of the things that were just passed down, that kept us safe. That fear kept us safe, but at the same time, it, like we were talking about earlier, it kept us small. And so the growth happens when everybody can fully be themselves, and not just the white kids who may feel bad about racism and slavery. If you learn about the history and want to do better, that's a way of gaining power and building connections. If you don't, that just keeps us divided.
And I think that's all it is just trying to keep us divided,
Hmm.
because there's so many things going on politically and otherwise that's making us more divided. And it feels like we're taking steps back, and we are, don't get me wrong, but I still think that there's hope, right? I still think that, some people may feel like they're fighting for nothing and nothing's going to change, but things are changing. You just can't sit there and be silent about it. And I think that's where all the fear and all these things are happening, to make people feel helpless, like they can't fight back, like they can't say something or they can't do anything. And I always try to encourage people to speak up for yourself, find out what you can do, find people you can have conversations with. It's amazing how there's a lot that we can do, but it's not told to people. It's like some people wouldn't know that they can go like you did and stand before people and say, hey, banning books is wrong. Yeah, you can do that. I mean, it's a public event, and some people think they're just so closed off and they can't, speak up. And then there are things going on in our, like, wherever people live, there town hall meetings going on, and those are public meetings that people don't know about, where they can vote for things, certain things coming into the county. And when all these things pop up, everybody's like, wow, well, where did this come from? Why are they doing that? Because when they had the public meeting, you didn't show up to say,
Nobody showed
hey, we don't want this here.
up. Mhm. And I think, and that's one of the first poems that I wrote about in Black Madonna. I wrote about how sitting here in the state house is boring. They schedule a meeting time and then they push it back when they know a lot of people know about it, to
Yep.
discourage people, like, oh, well, I came here on my break. Like,
Yep.
now I got to go back to work. They schedule the meeting specifically during work
During the day.
hours.
Yep.
Yes, they make it inaccessible. The fact that we don't have comprehensive civics throughout, like, our time, especially in high school, like, we just learn less and less about civics and how to be engaged. People think, oh, I vote for the president and that's my civic duty. No, you vote in local elections. You can show up and um say testimony in front of your elected officials, whether that is a town hall meeting, a zoning meeting, a school board meeting, any of those kinds of meetings. But if you can't make the meetings, you can watch them online and you can submit email comment. There's plenty of things that you can do to stay engaged. And they make it so, I remember when I used to flip through channels, like coming across C-SPAN and thinking, this is the most boring thing ever. Why would anybody want to watch this? And they do that on purpose
Yeah.
because they don't want people to watch it. They don't want people to be engaged. They don't want people to know what's going on. And we are so, not to say distracted, but distracted by our daily lives. Like, we're so worried about, okay, well, I gotta go to work, I gotta pay my bills. Like, sometimes I've got to work multiple jobs, I've got kids to take care of, and it's just so much to have this thing on top of it. And so it's so easy for things to slip by under our radar until it's too late. And again, about the elections, your vote has way more power if you're voting for city council, county council, school board versus like the president. And that's why people get a lot of disillusionment around voting, because they're like, well, does my vote actually matters? Yes, for your local elections it
Yeah.
does, because those are the people who are affecting your day-to-day lives. Yes, things come down from the federal government, but it's your governor, your state senators, your local representatives. Those are the people making the laws that directly affect your everyday life. And it can be a lot to keep up with, but just putting in that extra 30 minutes a week to keep up with people, reach out to your elected officials. There's an app called the SE Legislator app that you can track certain bills or certain issues that you care about. You can track what your specific representatives are voting on. It has all of their contact information. You can put in your address and find out all your elected officials. There's so many tools at your fingertips. It just takes a little bit of time and just a little bit of know-how to do it, but they intentionally make it so mysterious and intimidating when it really isn't.
Where did you get your passion from to become a voice for the voiceless and advocate for people?
I it was just always instilled in me. And even though my mom and my grandma weren't at the state house testifying, they were doing work in their local community. And that's another thing. You, if you don't have the capacity to do the work on the policy level, the legislative level, you can do work in your community. It was my mom who was making sure that she used to do hair, and she would do hair of like elderly women to make them feel good about themselves. She always made sure to give out Christmas gifts to all of her clients, and in turn me, all of my friends. Like, giving was so ingrained in my upbringing. And then with my grandmother, because she was on disability and didn't have to work, she would drag us around to the retirement homes, to just sit with the people and like give them donuts and things. She would pull up to people's houses and give them food and stuff if she knew they were sick or if somebody in their family died. Like, my mom and my grandma, they were the ones who taught me to show up. And then in college, I was a part of this program called the Bonner Leader Program. And honestly, I joined because it was a scholarship thing.
Hey.
But the meetings and the things that I learned was that was the foundation to help me really learn about civics and community engagement on a larger scale and level. And since then, like, we would do service trips. I went to DC, Cuba, and Ghana with them, and just learning about how people take care of each other in different places. That was just so eye opening to me. And during that time, I was like, oh, I got to get out of South Carolina so I can like go make a difference. But after leaving South Carolina and coming back, I realized that coming back was the best thing I could do for my
Mm,
community to make my home a better place. And that's something I've been talking a lot about lately, of people wishing ill on the South, like, oh, all of the flooding in Texas, that's what they get for voting for Trump. Like, those were babies that died.
exactly.
Like, people here, like, the South isn't just like the Trump supporters. There are a lot of Black people here doing a lot of good work to take care of each other. And the South would be a lot more purple if the lawmakers weren't gerrymandering and
Mm,
redrawing the districts to make
yeah.
sure all the Black voters are in one small concentrated area. And it's just a whole thing. But
Yeah.
just don't forget about the South. We're doing such great work here, and it doesn't always have to be like I said, testifying in front of Congress. It's how you show up for your community and take care of the people around you.
That's such a good point. I I have a love hate relationship with being from the South and being a South Carolinian, but at the end of the day, this is where I grew up. This is where I'm from. And like you said, there's some ugly things about it, but there's some beautiful things about it too. And, that's why I try to do my part to show the beautiful parts and,
Hmm.
show people who are doing things in the state and, make sure that people know like, hey man, I know it's the South and things, especially South Carolina, a lot of things need to be fixed. They should have been fixed a long time ago, but there's still hope. There's still hope in there. There are things that are being done. There are changes that are happening. They're just, not seen as much as the negative stuff that's always happening. But there is some change happening. Not overnight, but we're getting there. I still feel that way.
Yes. And what has really given me hope in these times is just finding my community and seeing the ways that they show up for each other, for us, for me. And politics is a lot right now, but
Yeah.
we still got each other, and there's still plenty of work that we can do to take care of each other. And I feel like Black people have always been doing this. Like, people are
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, like, these are unprecedented times. Like, Black people have lived through similar, if not worse, times, and we still survived because we took care of each other. And so if we turn back to community, that's how we're going to get through these tough times. Is, okay, vote in local elections and pay attention when you can, but also, how are you showing up for your community?
Ah, that's good. That's good. Uh, in reference to showing up for your community, we've talked a lot about books and your love for books. You are a bookstore owner. How did that come about? And you mentioned your blog, so I'm assuming that's where the name of your bookstore came from. But like, how that is major, okay? Like hearing about anybody who owns a bookstore, to me, I'm just like, wow, because books are wonderful things, and I can even go back to like as a child watching Reading Rainbow. That sort of thing got me like really excited about books, and of course, my mother was a teacher, and so education and stuff like that was important. But like I don't know, like Reading Rainbow, that just really, and it might have been just LeVar Burton, seeing him on there, and he's a black man, he's into reading books, and it's just like, yeah, reading books is cool. And I remember when he got that earring, it made him look, and that beard, it made him look extra cool to me. So I was like, man, like, books are really, really cool. And even though some people now they like digital reading and things like that, I still like putting my hands up in a book and thumbing through the pages. So how did you, come up with the idea like, hey, I want to be a bookstore owner?
Yes. So around 2021, I made a post on my Liberation is Lit Instagram, and I was like, in the next 5 years, I'm going to make this a bookstore. And I have been working and doing the blog. I worked a lot with survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence, both on college campuses and in the community. And I was kind of getting burnt out from that work, not necessarily working with the survivors themselves,
Right.
but working in the systems.
Yeah.
And it's a lot like working in helping professions. It's like, no, you're helping people. You have to give more and more and more and more and more. Give your all. And that was wearing down my mental health and my physical health. And so I was like, I tried to apply for other jobs, like doing less demanding work, and nobody would hire me. So I was like, well, let me try this entrepreneur thing. And I said I was going to start a bookstore. So let me just start asking people about how to start a bookstore. So I asked a ton of questions to book people I knew. I happened to write for the Feminist Book Club blog, and I asked the executive director, I was like, how do you get your books? What do I need to do? I asked this woman who I would see all the time at events when I was living in Athens, Georgia. She sold soaps. And I was like, well, how do you do your pop ups? What do I need to do?
Hey.
How do you find the events? And so I started just asking questions and networking in the community. I put out a call because when I quit my job, I had $500 in my savings account. So, and my mortgage on the first day of my freedom, my mortgage went from 900 something dollars to 1500 something dollars. And I was like, what am I going to do for money? I'm
Yeah.
like freaking out. And I put out a call and I asked people, like, do you have old books you want to donate? I'm going to start a used bookstore. And community poured into me, and I was able to get it up and running, and it's just been growing ever since. And the secret, I will say, is it's all about relationship building. Like, yes, I'm a one person operation, but well, now as of yesterday I have 4 new interns. But I I couldn't have done any of this without community. It was my sister who helped me with like my like branding stuff and helped me like set up my very first pop-up at Drip. It was all of my friends who donated their used books for me to get my inventory started. It was my mom who let me use her car to drive everything around before I got my system to fit everything in my Corolla. It was my dad who loaned me some money. Well, loan, he just gave it to me to cover my bills when I had like a soft, like a really bad month. Like it was community that poured into me and believed in what I was doing. And during the times where I felt like what I was doing wasn't needed, that maybe I should just go back and get a job. Like, I don't know if what I'm doing is going to work. And it was community that kept encouraging me and saying, like, no, this is needed. You are needed. And you are doing it in a special way. And I was just like, okay. And as of Juneteenth of this year, we celebrated our second birthday. So I must be doing something right.
Yeah, congratulations. A lot of people start things and they kind of fizzle out in a couple of months, but 2 years is major.
Hmm.
1 year is major, but you're 2 years in, and I love how it's grown from the time that you began until now. Any big plans for Liberation is Lit? Any, I don't know, audacious goals you want to put out there?
Yes. So I am working with a couple of, I'm putting out proposals to a couple of coffee shops and places to get like remote spots. I have gotten a couple of yeses, and we're just working out like logistics of how everything's going to fit in there. And then I thought about getting a storefront after a couple of devastating blows for storefronts not working out. I was like, okay, maybe this is a sign that I'm meant to just bring books to the community and meet the community where they are. So I am hoping in the next year or two to have a bookmobile to drive around Columbia, because I'm beating up my poor Corolla, like taking in bookshelves in and out the car and things
Yeah.
like that. So I'm hoping to get a bookmobile to be able to, again, meet the community where they are, especially us, and continue to do like my back to school events and at art, popping up at art galleries. I'm at Soda City, so continuing to just drive around Columbia and beyond, because I was at a homeschool conference in Raleigh, North Carolina a couple weeks ago. That was my first out of state pop up. So just meeting people where they are and bringing the love of books and up to all ages, because adults need to read too.
Yes. Meeting people where they are is so important. I often see a lot of people say, well, I did this and I did that, but you may have been exposed to that. You may have seen somebody, it might have been just, you in the right place at the right time, but everybody doesn't go certain places and get this type of exposure. And especially when it comes to reading, like so much power is in reading books, reading anything, just knowing how to read. Is so much power in reading. So sometimes you have to meet people where they are so they can see, like, oh, okay, so reading is actually fun. Because I know in school, reading for fun was kind of spoiled for me because of required reading. Having to read something I'm not interested in was kind of like torture to me, because I'm like, I wouldn't be reading this by myself, but you're trained to read that because you're going to have a quiz and test, so you have to pass it so you can pass and make good grades. So to see that there are so many different types of books that young people, older people, people of all ages can enjoy, and having that exposure, like, you have to meet some people, because some people, a lot of people aren't just going to walk into a bookstore, but if you present that to them, a certain book to people, and you show them and you show up, it's like, wait a minute, now she's coming here with this, what, a mobile bookstore, what is this, I've never seen this before. And then become interested, go inside, browse through some books, find a book, and then you have somebody who's found a whole new world of reading. And that is like a trickling effect. They can pass that on to somebody else, and it's like, hey, I read this book. Starts conversations, and it bridges gaps, age gaps, racial gaps, gender gaps, all type of things. But it starts somewhere, and that's meeting people where they are.
Right. And I I support any type of reading. I'm a huge audiobook listener. I don't do ebooks as much, but I'm starting to get into ebooks too. But whatever works best for you. If you want to read on your phone, if you want to listen, I listen when I'm driving everywhere. I listen on my walks in the morning. I listen while I'm cleaning my house. So it's just, people look down on certain types of reading. I'm not a reading snob. Like, if you
Yeah,
want to
me either.
only read romance, like, you read your romances, like, you listen to your audiobooks. I got my sister into reading because we have a 6 year age gap. And I was like, girl, I just want to read my book. I'm not trying to play. So I was like, okay, I just got to get you reading. So I got her into manga and graphic novels. So we would go to the library. She would check out like 10 at a time, and I check out my books. But it was because the culture of reading was instilled in my household. Like, my mom was an avid audiobook listener when they were back on cassette tapes.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and she would take us to the library. We would rush her to get her books so then she could take us to the section to get our books. We would listen to the books together in the car and talk about them. So you have to create, if you, every time somebody asks me, how do I get my kids to read more? Instilling a culture of reading in your house. And one of the biggest things not to do is do not use reading as a punishment. Do not be like, well, I'm
Yes.
going to take your game and you're going to read this book. like you were saying about like, oh, required reading, I don't want to read something I can't relate to. Making reading fun, something that they can relate to. If they really like sports, Steph Curry, there's like a bunch of little tiny chapter books about like Steph Curry, and like LeBron James has a picture book that he wrote, and just finding different ways to engage with their interests. And even though my sister started out with graphic novels, by the time she was in high school, she was reading 2 or 3 ebooks a day. I mean, a week, not a day, but reading some of them in a day. And so you just have to find that entry point and then make it a culture and make relationships and fun times around reading. And one of the things that also helped me, which they need to bring back, is Pizza Hut's Book It program.
Oh
I read a
yeah,
lot of books for free pizza.
me too. Me too. I saw somebody who wasn't familiar with that. Somebody who grew up in another country that they were in the military. Their parents were in the military or something, and they made like a snobbish comment about that, having to give pizza to kids to read. And I'm just like, teachers came up with this idea to make reading fun. It's not as bad as you're making it sound.
Right. Whatever gets people reading, I am for it.
Exactly. Before I let you get out of here, what's one thing about you that maybe not a lot of people know that you wish more people knew, if anything?
Um, okay, so I am leaning into my identity as an artist now. And I'm like soft launching that to people. I've been like posting my art more on my social media and stuff. But I could kind of like when I was a writer, or I am still a writer, but when I was like, well, I'm not really a writer. Like I just write here and there. And I was just like, no, I've always been writing.
Yeah.
Leaning into like, okay, like I'm self-taught, but I am an artist, and just I'm going through this book called The Artist Way, and it's like set up week by week to get you unblocked from creativity. And I realized after week 5, my sister made a comment of like, oh yeah, like you're not creative. Well, you're creative writing wise, but not other ways. And I was like, hey, no, I am an artist. And that was like the first time I defended myself as an artist.
Yeah.
So I am, it's a little uncomfortable because imposter syndrome and knowing so many other dope artists, but I am leaning into my identity as an artist. I make digital collages. I make um, regular collages too, multimedia collages, but digital, I commit more instead of just finding pieces that I think are cool. So I mostly work with digital. So I'm also a digital collagist.
Oh man, well, congratulations! I've seen some of your posts. I'm looking forward to seeing more. Being an artist is, I always thought it was cool. I used to draw and paint a lot, and I know my guests are probably tired of me saying this, but I'm going to get back to it. I'm going to get back to it. Um,
I'm gonna hold you to it. So next time I
hey,
see you, I'm gonna say, "Did you draw or paint anything lately?"
I need accountability. Please do. Let the people know how they can contact. Well, first of all, if you have any final words, anything you want to say, now's the time. And also, if you please, if you have any events or anything, or also how people can get in contact with you, share that information.
Yes. So, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I love the work that you do, and you inspire me as well with your blog and your podcast. And it was so funny. I was at a barbershop the other day and I saw somebody with the belt and the spatula, and I was like, oh, I thought of you and your Grill Master podcast stuff too.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, but people can find me. They can find information about the bookstore. You can follow at Liberation is Lit on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, and LinkedIn. All of those at Liberation is Lit. And the website is liberationislit.com. For my writing and my art and my personal stuff, you can find me at Tayler underscore made underscore books on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok.
Okay, and I'll have that information in the show description so you can just click on the link and get to it. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for spending some time with us. And to my listeners, as always, remember, keep pushing forward. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Brown Sugar Cafe podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Terrence P. Elmore, and this is the place where poetry meets conversation. Hit that follow button and turn on your notifications so you won't miss an episode. Check out my blog, thebrownsugarcafe.blog. Also connect with me on Instagram at thebrownsugarcafe. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and as always, remember, keep pushing forward.